Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. My guest today is Corina Newsome, who I found via Instagram. I've been new to Instagram in quarantine, and I took like a 2.5-year break from social media. Twitter was like my main thing before that time. And so I was only used to using Twitter, and I follow some scientists on Twitter and stuff, and like none of them are on Instagram. Mm-hmm. So I'm like fishing around for people on Instagram, and I started also just like following wildlife stuff, like, you know, just like BBC America, like just like all these like great Planet Earth and stuff, because especially now more than ever, I need like wildlife pictures and stuff in my life. And I found you on Instagram, started following you. You got some cool content on there. So I dug into your stuff a little bit. Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Corina Newsome, and currently I am a master's student at Georgia Southern studying 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟 seaside sparrows, which is a little bird that lives on the coast. Birds are kind of my thing. I love birds. I became obsessed with birds when I took ornithology in college. And so ever since then, I have been birding, which is the verb we use, you know, to say that we're going outside stalking birds. And so I've been doing that recreationally. And then, you know, I was a zookeeper for about 4 years after college, where I worked with a wide variety of animals, but birds were still my favorite. And so I was like, you know what, I want to contribute to the conservation of birds in some capacity. So that's why I went back to grad school to kind of work more on the research side of bird science. So that's why I'm here. And I recently, 2 weeks ago, just started a new job with Georgia Audubon as the community engagement manager. So I'm doing that full time now, which is really a dream come true, because like my whole mission in life is to connect people with wildlife, but to focus specifically on like oppressed people groups in this country in that work. So that's what I do.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, if you don't, could we talk about that a little bit? How does a birder connect with the public in a way to highlight other social causes?
Yeah, so I think that a couple of things. One, I recognize that a lot of people enjoy birds and don't call themselves birders. So the number one thing to recognize is that birding in the United States is a very white culture-centric activity that kind of misses the bird joy that exists in other people groups, simply because of the fact that it's literally 98% white, mostly male, mostly like retired. Right? So like, what young person of color is going to be like, I want to be a part of that group, you know? So I think... Yeah. But that's the case, I think, for a lot of like outdoor enthusiast groups and things like that. And so I think what there needs to be more of is not saying to, you know, people of color, Black people, like, hey, come join this all white group of older folks and let's go look at birds. Yeah. No, it's like connect with people. You know, I'm of course a Black person, but I spend a lot of time in these spaces, and it's important for the stories of people of color and Black people to be heard and to be told, because a lot of times our enjoyment of the outdoors, are doing literally anything, minding our business, can be negatively impacted by white supremacy, racism, by expectations of Black people, stereotypes. And, you know, we can kind of talk about that in any context, but in birding and in outdoor exploration, it can be very marked. And which is why we saw, you know, this summer when Christian Cooper, who's a well-known birder, was threatened in Central Park by a white woman who called the police on him and said, there's a Black man threatening my life. It was just, it was one of those situations where
he was a birder?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. He was out there birding, and this woman had her dog running around.
I didn't know that aspect of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Holy
and so,
crap.
Yeah. I was gonna say she basically like had her dog off leash, which is not allowed in that area because it's like a wildlife area, you know, that's like designated. And so he was like, can you please put the dog on a leash? She wouldn't do it. So he was like, I'm going to give treats to your dog if you don't put the dog on a leash. And so then she called the police and said, there is an African-American man threatening my life, and started like screaming and like doing a very—
I saw all that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's what happened.
That was birding? That's
birding.
Amazing. Well, yeah, because I mean, at first when you're talking about how all birders are white, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that stereotype forming in my head. But at the same time, I was like, well, it's probably just I get not feeling included. But I doubt there can't be that many like super racist birders out there. I just don't connect. Is this me being naive that I don't connect like wildlife science enthusiasts, naturalists. I just assume that they're like a hair toward the more progressive side of things. Am I wrong in thinking? I'm glad I'm asking this question, because now you can set me straight.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm glad that you've had experiences with people that lean that way, for sure. But so what's interesting is that the outdoors, whether you're talking about national parks, you're just talking about outdoor exploration, white people, and I'm gonna talk about Black people in particular, don't have the same experiences. Like a Black person, and there are lots of professionals in the field, one of which is Drew Lanham, who's a professor at Clemson, who talks about birding while Black. Like, if you're a Black man, you better not go owling, because you know what owling is? That means you're going outside at nighttime with binoculars looking for birds. You look, as a Black man, you're going to look mad threatening to the average white person. And so you just shouldn't do that. White people can do that. White people can go owling. But if you're a Black man, probably not safe. And even more than that, though, like a lot of times wildlife scientists, birders or otherwise, have to go into remote areas for their research, like out in the sticks. I do for my research. And out there, you're not just encountering wildlife scientists, you're mostly encountering residents who typically find you threatening and find you suspicious. And so those experiences are ones that tend to be specific to Black people and other people of color, but white people don't have those same experiences. And so when those experiences are brought to the table, oftentimes we're shut down, or we're told we're being too political, or we're bringing race into science or race into birding. And that creates a divide, and that silences the experiences of people who aren't white, which is exclusionary.
You are opening my, I thought as I'm, on the other side of things, getting like yelled at by people on Facebook constantly and fighting with Trump supporters and whatnot all of the time. I'm like, I consider I'm a comedian. Comedy is a pretty diverse field. So even though I'm like from a smallish Wisconsin town, had a super uber white upbringing and everything, for my background, like I sort of like to think of myself as like having gotten some exposure to that. But this is like a huge, wow, this is such a blind spot for me to not even think of the aspect of like, yeah, even just being able to go out and go hiking without arousing suspicion or something. That is such an incredible point to make. What about science in academia generally? Do you see barriers within academia? I know it's just from academics that I've talked to, that it's a big part of the current conversation going on within universities and elsewhere about including more diversity, or where different what standards and practices and I don't know. I'll let you talk on this subject.
No, you're right. And it's like, from the outside looking in, if academia is not your profession, or you're not really familiar, it can be hard to really, I guess, be aware of the intricacies of that kind of dynamic. But I think that one of the issues in STEM in general, whether you're in academia or you're working in some other capacity in STEM, lack of representation is a really big issue. So when I think, I've done this exercise with kids several times where I'll be talking to like a group of sixth graders and I'll say, just physically describe a scientist. And without fail, they describe a white man with glasses, a lab coat, crazy gray hair, and that's typically what they describe. And it's like, that's very telling for how we conceptualize scientists and STEM professionals, and then what kids think they can do. Because believe it or not, like the reason why I'm so aware of this is because my story reflects the importance for the need of representation in academia and in STEM careers in general, because it wasn't until I saw a Black woman wildlife scientist that I thought I could do it. And not because I was actively thinking, oh, only white men are wildlife scientists, so me as a Black woman, I can't do that. That thought never, ever crossed my mind. I didn't even know that my mind was structured that way until I saw her, and I was like, oh, wait, like, I can do this. Like, I can be a zookeeper. I can be a wildlife conservationist. And I didn't even realize my mind had filtered that possibility out for me until I saw her. And so that's when I realized, okay, like this perpetuation of whiteness, both, in reality in the academic space, and even what media portrays to be a scientist, has tangible impacts on whether or not kids choose those careers, And so that's one way. And then, another issue that can arise in academia is that you'll have, like, say, one Black person or one non-white person, and a lot of times people rush to this individual to speak for their whole ethnicity, to speak for people of color everywhere, to change the systemic issues in the culture and academia. And it's like, that person's just a scientist. Like, for example, I'm not a social scientist. I'm not a diversity and equity specialist. Like, I'm a scientist. So you should hire a specialist in this instead of coming to me for free labor to fix the problems in the university, So that kind of
right.
can be perpetuated a lot in academia, which can be very draining for people of color.
That's interesting. So just because you're a person of color in academia, then like the dean or whatever is coming to you like, hey, person of color, we want more diversity.
Or can you serve on every single committee that we have? Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow, this is going to be an enlightening conversation. Hey, have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard that study where they gave Asian females the math tests, and
No.
they had, it's pretty cool. So they had boy, I'm pretty sure I wish I could remember who did it and more of the specifics, but I'm pretty sure I have the gist of it down. They gave Asian women math tests, and they just gave them regular math, and they had like scores like, that were average math test scores and that. But then if instead before taking the test they had them fill in their gender, they would do worse on the math test because they were reminded that they're female. If they had them ask for their race ahead of time, they were reminded that they were Asian, and they did better on the tests because of these self-fulfilling. So these are also like concepts of ourselves that we take in and influence our behavior and what we think ourselves capable of and everything else.
Oh my, that's so true. Because, and listen, Shane, like to this day, if I encounter a challenge, right, that, I'm doing some sort of work in the field or a problem solving a problem of any kind, when I think about the fact that I don't see any other Black people in my academic space, that literally has a tangible impact on my ability to problem solve in that moment, because I start doubting, like I'm wondering, is there something about me? And that's why there's not very many of us here that I can't do this. Like, but I start questioning myself constantly. Like that happens all the time. And I hate to even admit that, because it's like, I want to be the confident, scientist and representative of, for Black women, but it's like, truly, yeah.
I would like to be the confident anything and anything ever. I never have been. Let me give you a real white ass example of a similar thing. I was rock climbing one time outdoors, and I like screwed up. I screwed up the looking at the route map I screwed up the grade level on a route, and it was much harder than anything that I'd ever done, but I thought it was like an easier route, and so I'm like climbing up it. I'm like, geez, this thing must be rated wrong and everything. And I'm just like, well, I stubbornly was just like, I'm gonna keep going, and I made it to the top, and I found out that it was like multiple grade levels harder than any route that I had ever done. And if you think about that, that is like that's a real metaphor for the stories that we tell ourselves in any like repressed group, any group of humans. No matter where you are, there are lots of things where people could accomplish quite a bit more if they just believed that they could. And for a guy that really has not too much place to speak on the subject, it seems like repressed groups would be the ones that are the most negatively impacted by some of these kind of self-fulfilling stories that we tell ourselves.
Definitely.
So do you has social media made much of this easier, or like to form networks and get attention and in terms of just inspiring younger people and giving kids today, like people like yourself, to look up to and see new possibilities?
Absolutely. And I would even say that social media has been like the chief capacity in which I've been able to do that most effectively and most like efficiently, because when I first got on like Instagram and Twitter, the first thing I did was I searched hashtag Black in STEM, because I was like, I am the only Black person. Well, I think I was up until grad school, I was the only Black person in all of my wildlife classes, in all of my vocational spaces. And then in grad school, there was one other person in wildlife science. So when I got on Instagram, I immediately Googled or searched hashtag Black in STEM. And I just was like poring over pictures of Black people doing STEM work, and followed all of that, like followed everyone I saw, and I realized how much life that gave me and how much I was missing by not having that. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to use social media to uplift as many people as possible, like me, who are people of color, Black people specifically, who are in this space, so that other people can see it. And so since I really started doing that, probably about like 2 and some change years ago, I have met so many Black people online. Even one of a guy who I know who's a birder. That word sounds so weird when I say it. He was a birder, a Black man and a birder in Atlanta here. We all met each other. There's like probably 100 of us in wildlife sciences who met on Twitter. And he was like, let's make a group chat. So we made a group chat, and we were all 100 of us in this group chat. And so in response to that situation that happened in Central Park with the birder, we did this like online event called Black Birders Week, where we basically were celebrating, telling the stories of, showcasing the work of Black people in wildlife sciences and in birding in particular. And that like had a snowball effect. And now there is Black in Neuroscience Week, there's Black Hikers Week, there's Black Botanist Week. And so it's just like Black people have been able to come together in a way that we can't in real life, because typically we're the only ones in our physical space. But online, you can connect to anybody really fast. And so not only can I be encouraged myself, but I can be seen by younger people. And there have been countless, and this is no glory to me at all, but there have been many like young people, whether they're in college or maybe high school, who have reached out to me and said, thank you so much for sharing your story, because I've never seen someone like me, and I realized how important social media can be for that, especially right now when we really can't even meet up in real life if we wanted to. But social media has been powerful for that.
I mean, this is amazing. Just from a purely selfish, like science enthusiast point of view, as someone who, I've had a science podcast for 6 years. I try to incorporate science in my regular comedy shows, even when I'm just in regular comedy clubs and stuff, but I also put together science specific shows, and, I do everything that I can to try to get the public into science, and it's challenge. Like I thought COVID happened. I'm like, well, now people are going to appreciate science. Whoops, that was a little naive. But you know, but people, you know, people do care about social causes, and also being able to use social causes to also help promote science. This just seems like a win-win for everyone involved, because the science stereotypes, they aren't helping like anybody when there's like a bunch of conspiracy theorists that picture some mad scientist in a lab coat meddling away, trying to put microchips into our 5G poisons, and that doesn't help anybody.
No. And you know what's interesting is that I was thinking about this recently, like communities, for that very reason, communities need to see the image of someone they trust represented in those decision-making spaces, in those science spaces, because I've seen this in my own family, and like in the Black community in medicine, for example, right? Like the field of medicine has violated Black people over and over again, like, so has earned distrust from Black people over and over again.
There's been some mistakes.
Listen.
Horrifying.
Yeah. And so like there is earned distrust there, right?
Yeah.
So I have seen my family not trust, like they will not go to a doctor, they will not take the medicine, they will not do anything that their white doctors tell them to do. But then one of my Black nephews, who's a little older than me, he became a doctor, and all of a sudden when he says something, people believe it, you know. And it's like, I trust this person. I know either they know him personally, or it's like, okay, we're from the same place, we're from the same culture, like he's someone I can trust, and so they'll believe him when he says stuff. And through that experience, I was like, wow, like representation, as you said, is not only important for just like future doctors and future STEM professionals, but for the people who have to trust this field for really big and important situations like a pandemic, you know? So yeah. You hit the nail on the head there, for sure.
Yeah, well, this was with the AIDS crisis. Scientists figured this out too, that people, they needed different communities. Every community needed like representatives that they could relate to within those communities for them to trust that. I mean, I don't want to talk about a subject that maybe not everyone in the world is comfortable talking about. Another thing that I do, I'm a psychedelic advocate. I made a documentary about kind of the research of psychedelics and stuff, and it's another aspect. I rarely talk about it on this podcast, but it's a third hat that I wear. And there's something that helped me with depression a lot and stuff like that. So anyhow, I'm in these I'm involved in these psychedelic research organizations like the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and they have like science conferences each year and stuff like everywhere else. So I go to do this documentary. So, you know, I don't have as much diversity on my podcast as I would like to, because academia is the way that it is, and maybe I just need to try harder or whatever. Maybe you can help me, but I have done a good job of making sure females are equally represented on my podcast. And I really wanted on my documentary to like have diversity, have people, and it's just nothing but old straight white dudes are like the main people that are still in the field, and it's changing rapidly. But part of it's along the same lines. Part of the reason why there's not as much diversity in that field is because it's like, you know, they're like, hey, there's these mushrooms or whatever, or MDMA is being used for PTSD, and there's a lot of minority groups being like, okay, like we've heard this story before. Sure, we'll just take your drug and that will help us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's going to take some work and intentionality on the part of all these communities, whether you're like medical science or whatever science you might be, to bridge that divide and gain that trust back. And you know, even for groups where there's not really necessarily a history of victimization necessarily by medicine, but like they don't see themselves represented, you know what I mean? And so they'll trust information from sources where they see common ground, and not from where they don't see common ground. And so, I'm not really familiar with the psychedelic science.
No, I wouldn't expect you to be. A few people are.
Yeah.
But it's boy, it's such a complicated issue, and having people with diverse takes is so important. Even if, to give you an example, like I said, comedy is like a really diverse field, right? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean like race or gender or sexuality or whatever. It's like comedy also, like one of my favorite acts that I saw recently, or that was on a show last year, was a guy that was a rodeo clown. And it's like, oh, well, you don't get to hear that every day. Like, I want to know everything about this guy's perspective.
Yes.
And the thing is that just like different perspectives, whatever they may be, are going to be really valuable, because otherwise we are, not just because they're hilarious and fun if it's coming from a rodeo clown, because we might have some major blind spots. Just like I would have never thought that someone has to, whether or not someone can go out birding is something that they have to think about if they're not a white person. That is insane to me.
Yeah, and I think that like the difference in perspective that comes from diversity is exactly what makes it so valuable. Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about birds. You want to? I mean, we can keep talking about social issues as well and mix them in, but I definitely want to get into some bird talk.
Yeah.
Are sparrows actually your favorite bird, or is that just like what you got into? All right. Okay. We're playing a game. I'm gonna count to 3. And then we both say our favorite kind of bird.
I like that. Okay.
And then we find out if you're correct or not, because I know that I'm correct. So here we go. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Bowerbird.
Blue jay.
What did you say? Bowerbird.
That's not a bad choice. Okay.
I told you.
Why the bowerbird?
I love the extravagant, like showy, just ridiculous, like the no utility, like for survival or anything else. Just pure. I mean, it's so. I just love that. I like that. Like, in some species, the males they'll build the tunnel in a way so that it narrows to have the forced perspective to like make them look bigger than they are. It's just such a reflection of like dudes. It's just like, here's this huge, ridiculous thing. It's on the ground, so it definitely doesn't make sense. No one wants to put an egg in there. That'd be dangerous. We're gonna go out collecting useless things, and then ladies are just like, well, I guess that's interesting. Okay, that guy then.
That's amazing. And you know what? Like, that's what I appreciate about bowerbirds. And I think like I always anthropomorphize birds in general, just like as a habit. Maybe not a great habit, but I do it. Like comparing behavior of birdmen to human men, and the extent to which, and it's not. The extent to which a male will try to sometimes even fool a female into thinking that he has better fitness and capabilities than he really has. And not that it's like conscious manipulation, but that's just how the genes play out. That's how evolution plays out. And then I'm just like, I have seen this behavior in this list of men before.
Oh, I'm doing it right now. You think I'm smart enough to have a science podcast? Of course not. But I can fake it like just enough.
Oh my gosh.
Well, now you're going to have to defend blue jays, because, I mean, all right, I wasn't expecting blue jay. Enlighten me.
People hate them. People love to hate blue jays. Here's the thing, though.
Really?
Oh yeah, because they're always like, oh, blue jays are assholes. Like they come to my feeder and
I haven't
terrorize
heard
the
the
birds.
stereotype.
Oh yeah, like blue jays are very okay. So the loyalty that I have to blue jays lies in the fact that I fell in love with birds because of blue jays. They were the first North American bird that I ever learned about, and I was so confused how such a colorful bird had been around. I had never even noticed it, right? Big too, like not tiny, like kind of big birds. And they're just incredibly, and I'm very cautious to use the word like intelligent or smart to refer to species of animals because there are different kinds of intelligences that some groups have that other groups don't. But they're in a family called Corvidae, which includes jays, magpies, ravens, things like that. Birds like among those species. And they're really well known for their intelligence. So they're really good at problem solving. They're really good at picking up on and remembering patterns. They're good at mimicry. Blue jays mimic, okay? Crows, ravens, all of them, like better mimics than parrots. Like more realistic. Listen, I could go on for days about corvids, right? But like blue jays.
Really?
Oh, yes. Real quick, I was in Friday Harbor in Washington, and there was a raven, a common raven, barking like a dog in a tree. I thought there was a dog flying over me. It was perfect mimicry. I look up and it's a raven. Anyway, blue jays, right? So blue jays are also good at mimicry. And there was one time I was at a feeder outside, and there were a bunch of birds there, and I heard a red-shouldered hawk, which I'm not going to do the imitation because it would be bad. But I heard a red-shouldered hawk, and I was like, oh, there's a hawk nearby. And the woman whose house it was, she was like, those are blue jays, and they're trying to scare off the birds by making them think there's a predator nearby, and it's just them, and then they'll come in and take all the food. So blue jays are just superior, incredible.
That's incredible. Well, I knew like I've seen primates do that to like one another, where they'll like make the signal to say that there's like a predator in the area, and then they all scatter, and then one will sneak in and grab everyone's food. But I never thought of an actual other species of bird. That's incredible for evolution just to stumble on this trick that these like birds don't even realize they're. I'm sure they aren't really like that conscious, like whatever stimulus is happening where they're like, I don't know, I make this sound, they all scatter, I get food.
Yeah. And it's like, I want to like, so corvids are my favorite group, blue jays are my favorite bird. And there was just one time I think they do some of this for enjoyment too. Like I was working with this American crow as a zookeeper, and one day we were closing out the day, and he had a bowl full of like fruit salad, like blueberries, apples, papaya, all this stuff, right? Greens. I was doing my checks, and I came to his enclosure, and I look at the floor, and he has arranged all of his fruit by color in straight lines, parallel lines. I was like, and just because. And then he ate it. You know what I mean? Like it didn't make anything happen, nothing, there was no benefit conferred to his survival. He just did it because he wanted to, and then he ate it. And I was like, corvids, man, you really can't get to the bottom of them. You just can't.
That's OCD. That bird has an actual mental, that bird needs therapy is what that is so bizarre.
Yeah.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Are those that the corvid? Do they have? I always forget what's that name of the bird that can like just mimic any sound. Like if a chainsaw's in the area, they'll make chainsaw noises and stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Because it's not a mockingbird, is it?
No.
Like
Mockingbirds can't do that.
Kind of a bigger, fat.
Yes, it's like a foul looking, yeah. I'll have to look that up. I can't remember what it's called. But I've seen it on like BBC, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Well, what about when you're mentioning crows? Oh, this is something that I need to know before I keep on spreading bad information. I don't expect you to be a crow expert, but is it when you talked about stalking birds? It made me think of the I've heard that crows will like stalk people, like if someone like wrongs them or whatever, they can remember their face and treat them. Have you heard this?
Yes.
Is that an actual thing?
Yes.
Or
very much.
Whoops.
The stalking part, like, I don't know, like, so when you say stalking, I don't know if you mean like follow them. I don't know if crows will follow people. I don't know, but they will remember. So if some sort of negative experience happened, they will remember who it was, and they can even spread that information to other crows who have never seen that person before, and they will also avoid that person or like have a reaction to that person. And one of my friends who's a crow scientist, Dr. Kaylee Swift, talks all about that all the time. Yeah, crows are phenomenal. Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's because they can pass it on to their children and stuff, right? Just be like, we don't. Just so you know, we don't like this guy.
When this guy comes around, right?
Have you ever seen? There was some study where they took primates and they put boy, this is one I'm really risking. I hope I'm not spreading bad information here. But it's so fun. So whatever. They have like 5 primates, right, that live together in some lab or something. There's some ladder with like treats up on the top of the ladder, and if the primates go to climb up for the treat, treats are great, the sprinkler system goes off and they don't want to get wet, and so they eventually associate going for the treats with the rain, so they don't go for the treats anymore. Then they'll take one of the primates out, introduce a new primate that doesn't know this, and if he goes for the treats, they'll like stop him or even like beat him up or whatever to stop him so they don't get rained on. And then he doesn't know why, but he just like assimilates the social behavior, and then they bring in another primate, swap out one of the old ones, and the same thing happens. And now the one that never actually saw the rain or the association, he participates in like educating the new one or whatever. And then they eventually get them all swapped out so that there's 5 in there that never saw the rain or anything, never have, and they just have they just won't go for the treat on the top of the ladder. That's
cool, because I've heard, we hear about cultures, so to speak, in primate groups, family groups, whatever, where certain behaviors or certain tool uses, whatever it might be, are kind of passed on. But that is like next level.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm going to have to look that up. I'm going to have to look more into that. That's cool.
So what are I don't know anything about sparrows. Give us an introduction to sparrows.
Sure. So sparrows are, I would say, from my experience, one of the most or least appreciated bird groups. Because when you picture a sparrow, people usually picture a brown colored bird, but not like in a favorable way, but like it's like a dull bird, right? A dull bird that doesn't do anything fun. That could not be further from the truth, right? So while sparrows are not my favorite group, of course, I still love sparrows, and I specifically study the seaside sparrow, as I mentioned. And sparrows, they can be found in just such a wide range of habitats. You can have sparrows in grasslands, you can have sparrows in forests, like just all over the place, different types of habitats. The sparrows that I study are adapted to life in a coastal environment. So they live in coastal salt marshes, which are, hear me when I say, the worst environments ever. Like, they are brutal. Like, when you look at a coastal marsh, like from the road or something, it's like, oh, look at that peaceful, like homogeneous, like beautiful landscape. When you get in it, let me tell you that everything's on the line, right? So that's kind of where I do my field research. These birds are adapted to experiencing and kind of being subject to a high tide twice a day, right? Because it's tidal. They're subjected to no fresh water, only salt water. That's the only water they have access to. And predators from every direction, okay? So the birds that I study, their eggs can survive underwater for 30 minutes, which is a feat because birds, when they're in the egg, will breathe through the shell, right? So they can essentially hold their breath, so to speak, not literally, in the egg and not have any gas exchange for 30 minutes underwater. They drink salt water, right? If they lose, go ahead.
How do they do that?
Right.
Can other birds do that?
There are some other birds that are basically strictly in saltwater environments.
Okay.
Can do that. So they're like renal system, their kidneys and everything. They have glands to help them excrete salt. There's a whole system, several systems involved in surviving that. But just the thought of only drinking salt water is unpleasant to my mind. But anyway, they can do it just fine. And
what predators do they have?
So depends on what sparrow species you're talking about. But the ones that I study, they are subjected to so they can have some mammalian predators like mink, American mink, which are like semi-aquatic mammals, rice rats, which are semi-aquatic mammals.
Hold on. Are you just talking about like getting their eggs or actually getting the sparrows themselves?
So adults are a little bit more adept at getting away from a predator, but they will get, hatchlings, nestlings, fledglings, eggs, any stage in life history. Yeah. So they have mink, rats, raccoons are predators. Then you got birds who are predators. So blackbirds, crows, grackles. Then, there have been some observations of fiddler crabs, which are like this big, like an inch wide, crawling into nests and killing and eating the eggs, right? Little crabs. Last but not least, I recorded, for the first time ever recorded, at least in published science, it actually just got published recently. During a high tide, the water came into a nest. There was one chick and two eggs. The chick had just hatched that day. It was floating on the surface of the water, still in the nest, right? Still surviving. Its nostrils were above the water. You could see it moving. All of a sudden, a fish, a 𝕊𝕤𝕤𝕤𝕤, leaps out of the water and into the nest, right? This chick is still floating on the water. The fish is under the chick. This fish grabs the chick by the leg and just thrashes it around, eating bits and pieces off of it, eventually killing the chick. So now they have fish predators too, which they probably have for a long time. But like now we know that there are fish who are who are risks to their survival as well. So they really just have mortality.
What else could go wrong?
Sea level rise can go wrong.
What's that?
Sea level rise. That's what's going wrong now. But yeah.
Oh yeah, sea level rise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're just facing a lot of threats.
Are they that scrappy little birds, huh?
Right. And when you look at them, you think, oh, it's just another sparrow, but people have no idea what these birds go through on a regular basis and their adaptations, the code in their genes that allows them to still survive anyway.
So what's their migratory patterns like?
So this particular species is not migratory. So at most
Interesting.
Like some northern populations might move down, like northern in the United States might move down the Atlantic coast a few states, but they're not like going to South America, Central America, or anything like that.
Yeah, I like that. That's so what's let's talk a little bit about what's their mating behavior like, because birds do always have some pretty fun stuff going on.
So this species, they're nowhere near as elaborate as a bowerbird or some other, very...
That's okay. It's impressive that they can survive all their threats. So I'll give them that. Right.
What they do is the males, and I know I'm not going to be able to capture this well with words, but essentially males will sing, of course, like is the case for songbirds. They'll perch on a piece of grass and just let their song go. But when they're really trying to get the attention of a female, they will. So these birds will shoot up really high in the sky, which is not typical because they're not grassland, but they just essentially move around in the grass and kind of at that height, off the ground, not really much higher. Males will shoot up in the air, arch their back like really intensely and sing, and it's just like I cried one time because the first time I saw it, I was like, is that a seaside sparrow like up in the sky? Sure enough, male arched his back, did his little dance, sang, and I was just it's so beautiful.
Well, that's a solid move.
Yeah.
That's impressive. You got to admit, you're.
I'm like, you could use that energy for so many other parts of your survival. Yeah.
I would love to talk about some of the human impact, as you mentioned, sea levels. What specific area are these guys in when you're studying them?
So seaside sparrows are found along the Atlantic coast of the United States, like way up by Maine, all the way down to like Florida, and over into the Gulf as well, like into Texas. I am studying the 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟 seaside sparrow, which is only found in North and South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. I'm focusing on Georgia populations. So when it comes to sea level rise, which is affecting literally anything that lives on the coast and anyone who lives on the coast, is essentially intensifying threats that already exist. So living in a tidal environment, they are already exposed to the risk of nest flooding and having their offspring drown, just with natural variation in high tide. But sea level rise is going to make high tides higher and higher and higher. So we're expecting nest flooding to happen more often. The problem is that their behavioral response, their behavioral adaptation to losing a nest to flooding is to rebuild a nest right away, but to build it higher off the ground so as to decrease the chance that it would get flooded again. The problem with that is that the higher they place their nest off the ground, the more visible they are to predators. So they're really caught between a rock and a hard place, two opposing threats. And, which one is worse? How do they balance it? We don't know yet. So essentially, that is the biggest threat to their survival looking into the future. And my research kind of comes in at the nest predation side. So I'm studying how nest predation varies across the landscape of their breeding habitat. Yeah, that's one of the threats, but yes.
So are there multiple kinds of sparrows in a given area, or are sparrows spread out? Does each sparrow species have its own niche in a different area? So
there is some there are certain range limits for certain species of sparrows. So certain sparrows are only found, or more abundantly found, maybe more in the north than in the south. Where I'm doing research specifically, we will typically have seaside sparrows. In the north, you'll have salt marsh sparrows. We'll have, let's see, what other sparrow species do we have down here? During the winter, other sparrow species will do, like I said, like a little bit of, I don't even know if it's necessarily called migration, but they'll move a little bit and those ranges will overlap. And we'll have maybe like 2 or 3 species of sparrows kind of in the same geographic region. But there are definitely there is some separation that you won't find a lot of salt marsh sparrows down here, but you will find a lot up north. So there is some overlap and also some kind of divisions, if you will.
How would you say that that birds? This might be too general of a question. Maybe just sparrows. I'm curious how resilient birds will be to the influences of global warming, because I know, as this is considered kind of the 6th great mass extinction, and I think there's like 100 species on Earth a day that we're losing, or something like insane like that. Not that species have always gone extinct here and there, but it seems like things are speeding up quite a bit on the old extinction front. How vulnerable are birds? How quickly can, this is such a flawed question because it's so general. So penguins are obviously going to be, there's not going to be tons that they can do if they're a little area that they're in, if ice caps melt or whatever. But it seems like something like a sparrow could kind of move around and change with the climate a little more.
Sure. So you're getting kind of to the answer here, where it's like certain bird species are very, very specialized to a very specific area. So something like a penguin that needs ice, that needs certain temperatures, right? It's like are very few places that can provide that outside of where they are right now. There are other species here in the southeast where I live, like the brown-headed nuthatch, which is just the cutest freaking bird. Oh my gosh, and they make squeak sounds. Look it up. Very much worth it. Anyway, they are kind of specifically adapted to pine savannas, like longleaf pine savannas, and those habitats really only exist in the southeast. And so typically if a bird can kind of utilize a variety of different kinds of ecosystems to survive, they can move with cooler temperatures, right? So we're seeing a lot of northward, a push northward for a lot of range expansion for birds to kind of stay within the temperatures that they want to live in and need to survive. But if there's a disconnect between the habitat that you need and the temperature you need, which is happening for a lot of species, including penguins, brown-headed nuthatches, whatever it might be, that disconnect is what's really going to do them in. But there are some birds that are more plastic and where they can find resources and where they can survive, and they're
kind of like generalists, sort of.
Right. Exactly. So they can live in different places, eat different foods, and so as they have to move north, they can find what they need. But not everyone can do that.
Okay. Well, what is sparrows' roles in their ecosystem in terms of, I asked how their ecosystem, their environment and changes are maybe impacting them. What are sparrows' role in terms of insect populations or whatever else?
Yeah, so a lot of sparrows will, as you said, most sparrows are pretty omnivorous, so they'll eat a combination of plant material and insects, and even other invertebrates like crabs, depending on where they live. But a lot of sparrows are seed dispersers, so they will eat, plant material, poop out the seeds, and this is the case for a lot of birds that ingest seeds. And simply by eating, going somewhere else, and then pooping, moves seeds around, increases genetic diversity and health of plant populations. So seed dispersal is very important. You have sparrow species that, as you said, eat lots of insects, and so therefore will help to control the population of insects that can oftentimes be very detrimental to people if they surpass certain population thresholds when it comes to like the destruction they wreak on crops or human health, whatever it might be. Seaside sparrows in particular, in their ecosystems, they eat a lot of insects. So their diet during the summer is mostly comprised of insects. And as it gets colder, they incorporate more plants. But they'll eat everything from moths, which I love because I'm petrified of moths. They'll eat moths.
Petrified of moths?
That isn't even.
What are you talking about?
Moths and butterflies. I cannot.
What are you talking about?
I can't. Yeah.
What?
No.
Yeah, I can't. No, I can't. I can't deal. You can't deal with butterflies. I can't deal with your opinion on butterflies. What do you explain yourself? What's going on here? They're not poisonous. They don't bite. You're just against the most beautiful insects. What are you? You just have a strong preference for the ugliest insects, or what's?
I really think, like, if I was locked in a room with a monarch butterfly, beautiful, right? Gorgeous insect. If I was locked in a room with a monarch butterfly, I think I would pass away. Okay, so
what are you?
The problem I have, because the color on, say, picture whatever beautiful butterfly, whatever moth. The color you have, the eye spots, the dark color with the light color, and it's right on each other like that. It's just too much. Like, it makes me nauseous to even look at that. Then two, they're chaotic. They're here, and then with one flap, they can literally just be anywhere. I don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're going, right? I can't.
What are you talking about?
So it can touch me, and the thing is, I'm not afraid of pain. I'm not afraid of dying. So I'm not afraid of poisonous, biting. That doesn't scare me. However, if I got brushed by a butterfly on my arm, the thought, oh my God. I didn't go swimming outside for years because I was afraid that I would be wet and a butterfly would stick to me. Anyway,
you didn't go swimming?
Outside. I was at an indoor pool.
For years. Because of butterflies.
Yeah, the thought of one sticking to my wet skin undoes me.
Wow. That's,
But
I mean,
anyway.
we all have our things. Oh no, we don't just get to, oh, but anyway, you're weird. Moth, the butterfly phobia. We're digging into it a little bit. Maybe it's the case because don't butterflies have like some? I mean, some of it is. I mean, isn't it some of it mimicking like poison to as a self-defense against birds?
Yeah.
Maybe you're part bird now. Maybe you've been stalking birds for so long. You have bird eyes. You've been looking through. Your theory of mind, your ability to anthropomorphize yourself and put yourself in the. I guess you don't say shoes of birds. But you. So now your disgust mechanisms are triggered by the same things that birds are.
I'm actually going to be using that from now on as the
I
justification.
think that's what's happened to you.
You said what?
I think that's what's happened to you.
And it's like, I've always thought, like there's my reaction.
You've gone bird-brained. That's like the new definition of bird-brained when you actually take on evolved preferences for birds. You find yourself eating a lot of worms as well. Because we might be getting down to the bottom of something here.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Yeah, I'm definitely.
What about caterpillars? You're okay with cat? Well, no, yeah. Well, none of this is logical.
No. I'm fine with cat. I would like to think that the bird brain would work and would follow my whole preference list, but it doesn't. I love
what about
spiders.
Cocoons?
I love.
You scared of cocoons?
No, nothing.
You're not scared. You're not scared of the. Okay. You're not scared of the caterpillar that's going to become a butterfly. You're not scared of cocoons that are just like moments away from being a butterfly. You're scared of actual just butterflies. It's the grazing.
Send it back.
Huh. So I'm not the only one giving you a hard time about this. No, this is, and you know why you deserve this. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So sparrows eat moths and butterflies.
Yeah. Well, there's not so much butterflies out there. It's really just the moths. But yeah, they eat moths.
Okay.
lepidopterans.
Yeah. And then I guess in a way they're also they're some of their predators. How much of their remind me of some of the predators again? There was
mink.
So like how much of a mink's diet is dependent on sparrows and stuff? I'm just trying to get to the bottom of like how, I don't know, is there like a rating for what's considered a keystone species or whatever? Yeah. And like what's not? Is that like I literally don't know. Is that like on a scale of how like a given ecosystem on a whole, how dependent it is on a particular species?
So I don't think there's necessarily a like set scale, but there is like that designation for something to be a keystone species. Something else, some other species needs to rely on it for survival. And so seaside sparrows are, and I don't think any, as far as I know, I don't think any sparrows are considered keystone species. They of course contribute to the health and dynamic of their ecosystem, but I don't think that there are any keystone sparrow species. But as far as like the diets of other birds and how much they contribute, I'm not sure. How much a mink or a raccoon. Their predators tend to be very much generalist. So whether you're talking about the mammals like raccoons and mink and rats, or the birds, they're literally just running through the marsh, eating whatever's in their path. You know what I mean? So they're not like seeking out seaside sparrows specifically. They're eating crabs, they're eating marsh wrens, they're eating everything out there. Mussels, yeah.
So sparrows don't have like an arch nemesis. They just, everything, their whole world is just danger.
They do actually have an arch nemesis. The seaside sparrow specifically, yes, the marsh wren that I just mentioned is another bird that's about half their size. They don't eat each other. They don't really interact, but their niche.
They're just passive aggressive.
Not passive.
They just make snide comments on one another.
I wish. So the marsh wrens are like half the size of a seaside sparrow.
Okay.
But I have never seen territoriality and aggression like I have seen in a marsh wren anywhere in my life. I caught on video probably 5 times marsh wrens, so I'll have a video camera on a seaside sparrow nest and I'm watching incubation, I'm watching it all. The mother will leave the nest to go get some food. God forbid she's hungry, right? Immediately, a marsh wren will fly to the nest and with the angst of like 1,000 marsh wrens, poke holes in all the eggs to kill them.
Oh.
And then fly away. Sometimes they'll level it up, poke holes in all the eggs, and then toss them out of the nest.
What is even the point? Are they competitors for resources?
Exactly. Yeah. So they have this niche overlap where they eat a lot of the same things. They nest in the same area. And seaside sparrows, though, are like really minding their business. Like seaside sparrows mind their business. They make their nest, they raise their offspring, and they're just doing them. A marsh wren is at no point in its life minding its business. And wrens are like known for killing the eggs and offspring of other birds, even other wrens, like their own species. They will kill the chicks, they will kill the eggs. And so this behavior has been seen in a variety of of wren species, but it has never been recorded in the marsh wren before. So to see it with my own eyes, I'm angry. I'm still angry. I don't know if I ever won't be angry about that.
What birds are the biggest assholes? Would you say it's the wrens? What is it? The cuckoo or whatever? What's the one
cuckoo?
what's the one that puts its mimic eggs in?
So the cowbird. The cowbird, cuckoos, a lot of birds are nest parasites.
The nest parasites. That's pretty. I mean, it's hard to beat that in terms of like not only kill your children, but you raise my children now. Yeah. Kill your children, you raise mine.
Have you seen the videos of like, and I can't remember if it was a cowbird or a different nest parasite, but like they hatch, they can't even see. They can't see, they can't barely stand up, and they are shoving the other chicks. Have you seen those videos?
Yeah. They back up into the it's incredible that they just have that instinct. That's just like their first thing. The moment they're born, they're just murdering.
From jump.
And then but then they're not. I wonder if they're not that. That's strange that they just like. I think they like chill out later in life too. Like they're not. They don't. They just do most of their murdering as babies. Then you don't need to remember doing that and live with that remorse. Just like come out of the egg, murder stuff, and then you mature and you're like, that's like murdering. That's what kids do. I don't murder anymore.
I'm like tearing up. You're hilarious.
So tell us as we're wrapping up, what's some of your I want to hear about your new position doing as someone who, I mean, I've been just calling myself a science enthusiast because I don't fancy myself good enough at science communication to give myself the title science communicator. I sure try, but what's your new role and what are you kind of looking forward to doing?
Yeah, so
and within that, how can people check it out?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So the organization I work for is called Georgia Audubon. Before, like, probably within about a month ago, they were just Atlanta Audubon, and they just rolled out this statewide expansion. So a lot of my job is focusing around connecting residents of Georgia with Georgia Audubon and with other local chapters of Audubon that exist in the state of Georgia. And Audubon, for those who don't know, is a bird-centered bird conservation organization. And my role specifically is going to address the homogeneity of the space of birding. So I'm going to be like, my role is essentially to intentionally evaluate the ways in which our programming or the way we've run what we do has centered whiteness and has excluded people who aren't white or been uninviting people who aren't white. Run that through a filter of equity essentially and figure out, like, really interrogate what we do. And change in response to that. And then as we're rolling out new programs and making new connections, centering other people's voices, Black people, Indigenous people, other people of color, LGBTQIA people in the state of Georgia, to get them involved with what Audubon is doing, because Audubon does a lot of really great work when it comes to conserving birds and has a really important voice when it comes to bird conservation. But people have to be at the center of that. Any wildlife conservation, any environmental issues organization, if you are not centering people, you won't be successful. And so I think we are more and more realizing that not only do we need to center people, we need to center the people who have been historically oppressed. And that is how we'll get the most just, most equitable, most successful programming for people and for birds at the forefront. So that's what my work kind of centers around. There's a lot of things involved, but that's the gist. And I would say that if you are a person looking to support that kind of work. So if you're in Georgia, of course, I would encourage you to join Georgia Audubon or your local Audubon chapter where you are. But wherever you are, there is likely some kind of bird conservation organization. It's, like I said, birding has been historically pretty white, but the joy of birding is so infectious and so incredible that I've stayed despite that homogeneity, you know what I mean? And I encourage people to look at birds, to watch birds, to donate to programs that connect people with birds and with wildlife. So that's basically my main suggestion for people, no matter where you are. You can always put money and resources to that kind of effort.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty easy sell. Like I don't meet in terms of like getting people into bird. You don't meet too many people that are like that dislike birds,
right?
like it seems like such a natural instinct to be, humanity has looked to birds, to has aspired to fly, this has been a part of who we are for who knows, millions of years, perhaps,
right.
before we were even humans. We may have been birding.
Some
of our ancestors. And I mean, I literally know more people against butterflies than against birds, and I only know one. But
that was good.
It's funny because I would never have. I love to find some new aspect of my ignorance in each and every episode. And this one, I would have never made the connection between the need for diversity within birding. I always just picture, I mean, our birds, is there like a lot of like homophobia going on in the birding community?
No.
I wouldn't suspect that there'd be a lot of like, hey, no homosexuals in our bird watching
right
club. Am I wrong in thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue kind of is the similar one with the demographics that you encounter while you're birding. So a lot of times, again, like I said, the birding demographic in the US is very white, very old, and you will encounter, like I have heard people say all kinds of stuff about all kinds of people, just flippantly as a joke, just ignorantly, like whatever, not because they're necessarily trying to actively hurt someone, but they are conditioned to think a certain way and don't see any problem with that. And so those environments, when you're dealing with white old people in America, is risky. If you are an LGBTQIA, member of the LGBTQIA community, if you're Black, if you're Latinx, like any number of these groups that have, even right now, when you look at the political landscape, it's like, it feels like a risk. And so if you can create a space that someone knows that this part of their identity will be welcome, like actively welcome, and it doesn't feel like they're walking into like maybe a gauntlet, that's important. And so that's kind of what I want to do with my work, is create those spaces where someone knows that they are fully welcome.
What's that thing each year where people go around trying to identify the most species of birds?
The big year?
The big year?
You're talking about a big, yeah, so like when a person spends like a year looking for birds, it's called a big year.
Oh,
is that what you're talking
that's
about?
what it is. Yeah. So they try to check off how many they can see in a given year.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of like a birder doing the big year who also is against diversity for some reason, like in humans, is like literally traveling around celebrating the diversity of birds.
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm sorry, but only straight white men should be celebrating the diversity of all of these birds.
And the crazy thing is, like when I talked about that Black Birders Week thing that we did, the comment section on every Audubon page was crazy. Like we had a lot of people supporting, right? But then the people who would be in there talking about stuff, why are you bringing race into this? You're being divisive. You're accusing us of like perpetuating division, right? And it's like, how can you sit here and be so excited about two different species, right? Like the diversity between birds, and be angry when someone talks about the diversity between humans? How?
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. Well, so this is funny because before this interview, I already would have closed with a question that was, what are some good tips for first getting into birding? But I didn't realize I was going to have to be like, well, what color are you? If you're black and you want to get into birding, first wear a shirt that says, I'm just out here birding. Call your friends, let them know where you are in case you go miss. There's like a whole extra set of checklists that goes along. So, okay, so you get there and then you've done that. Then just in terms of the birding aspect itself, where do you recommend people get started? Because this is a fine time. I emailed you. I have nature episodes on the show, some, but not as much as actually like represents my interest, because this is like David Attenborough and like all of that, all of the, speaking of straight white guys, but all of naturalists are the reason why I have this podcast. Watching animal documentaries, learning about evolution is the reason why I have this podcast, and I don't have I don't have nearly as many wildlife episodes on here as I'd like to. And now with quarantine and people wanting to distance and everything, this seems like just such incredible time for people to start getting outside and start exploring nature a lot more. And well, everyone's like trying to take on new hobbies and whatnot. Boy, birding sounds like something that you can do pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
Is a great way to get some fresh air and exercise. So were there any like early books that you saw early on, or are there any like really good resources online for beginners?
So one thing I would recommend is, one thing I want to say first, like typically when people think of birders, they picture like all this equipment, binoculars, cameras, scopes, all that. You don't need anything to go birding. You can just use your eyes. You can just use your ears. But one thing that I would recommend as a resource, there is an app called 𝕊𝕬𝕦 ID, which helps you identify birds. So I think you can take a picture of a bird that you see if you don't know what it is, and it'll either tell you what it is or give you a couple of options of what it could be, and you can kind of look in the details and see, match it up with whatever is correct. But what I would recommend as far as process is concerned, if you have access to binoculars, definitely get them. They open up the whole world, right? But what I would do is I would just go outside where you are, because birds are everywhere. They're in, they're not just in the tropics, they're not just in forests, they're not just in grasslands, they're in the hood too, they're everywhere. Go outside where you are, find any bird, whatever bird you see first, find a bird, figure out what it is. Use that Merlin ID app. If you have a field guide, which most people don't carry around nowadays, at least young people, use a field guide. Figure out what that bird is and learn as much as you can about that bird. So say you go outside and you find a northern mockingbird, right? A bird that you may not have paid attention to before because they're gray. It's like they don't seem that interesting. When you look into their behavior and into their life history, what they do, what they're adapted to do to survive, to court, you learn about the details of what they eat. You learn about the details of how they mimic and what they mimic and when they mimic. You learn about how they will flush birds or flush insects and scare insects out of grass by like beating their wings really fast and spooking bugs to eat. Yeah, I mean, you learn a lot of details. And then the next time you see a mockingbird, it will be very easy for you to identify it because you've keyed in on so many aspects of what it does and how it does it. And as you do that, kind of work yourself into more birds. So next time, maybe you add a northern cardinal in there. Next time you might add, even a European starling, which is not a native bird, but still super interesting and super cool. And as you kind of pick up on what specific birds do, it makes it easier to identify. And you kind of just start accumulating that. And it becomes addicting. It becomes like a treasure hunt is how I kind of describe it. It's like you go outside, you never know exactly what you're going to see, but you will always see something. And I think that's what makes it so cool.
Yeah, it's so and it's like such a kind of confirmation bias in like in the most positive way too. Once you like learn a new thing or become conscious of a new thing, even just hearing a new word, or so all of a sudden you start hearing that word around everywhere. But I imagine when you start getting into birding, you just all of a sudden your conscious experience is just you living in a world of birds all the time. And that sounds like a lovely place to be. I think you talked me into birding. I wrote down you said it was Merlin?
Merlin. Yep. MERLIN.
Okay. Yeah. I'm downloading that right away.
Yes.
It's very cool. Yeah. I'm into it. And then where should people find? Is Instagram your main thing? Well, I saw you're on Twitter as well. Why don't you plug all the things?
Okay. Well, if you're on Instagram, my Instagram is Hood Naturalist, but it's Hood 2_ Naturalist. And then on Twitter, it's Hood 1_ Naturalist. So you can find me in both those places.
All right. Or they can just, because you have a website as well, right?
Yeah. It's hard to find.
You're a real outsider for a lot of academics don't. It's surprising to me that academics don't like do a bit more to make it easier for people to find their stuff and whatnot. But anyway, what's your website?
The website is really long, and it's not. I don't know that it's like it has like a lot of numbers because it's free.
Let's Google Corina Newsome.
If you Google me, it'll come up, I think, and then it's on my social media pages as well. It links to my website.
I'll put all the links on my site as well.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Corina Newsome, you're awesome. Thank you.
You're awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll see you next week.